Welcome to the Day Every Friday. My name is Michael Schimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We run this session here every Friday to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about Data Vault, data-driven applications, data mining, cloud computing, MVP stuff, MVP clusters, and so on, right? All questions are allowed. You can raise your questions using the chat here during the live session. You can use the Q&A function in the client. You can also just raise your hand. I would give you a voice. And if you can wait until next week, I'll show you a link to a form after today's session where you can essentially submit your questions, and then I'll create a little small slide deck just like today, and we'll discuss your questions essentially. And if there will be no questions at all, I will talk about the MVP cluster. Haven't done much, so let's just jump straight to the slides here and just share my screen here. And this is about essentially FTP satellites or status satellites, and how we deal with soft deleting records in a data platform, essentially using Data Vault. Let me just read this question briefly for you. Move some stuff here on my screen. Okay, so I would like to validate with you the code template of virtualized dimension that considers status tracking satellites. In our book and example, you always demonstrate a simplified version. However, in real life, project status tracking needs to be considered. Here's a description of basic scenario, and then this person here has a couple of satellites involved. There's a PRT table. That's a just a PRT table as defined in the book, essentially, for a concept like customers and product and so on. We got indexes and so on. It's all good, and that's important. It also includes the status tracking satellite. Now, and then we got a couple of satellites here, one or two data satellites with some descriptive attributes from a source, or from different sources actually. One satellite as source one. So we got some data from source one essentially. That's essentially the golden source. Okay, it's a golden source, so that might be an MDM system that delivers some data and describes the concept's business key, essentially, the customer number, what else. And then we got another satellite here coming from another source system, got some additional descriptive data, essentially. And so that's one thing. And then for each source system, we also have status tracking satellites, one for source one and another one for source two. And yeah, so the first thing is, and this comment is essentially from the person who asked the question here. So the assumption is that the status tracking satellite checks if the descriptive data was deleted or not. That's not the purpose. So the status tracking satellite tracks whether the business key has been deleted or not. That's not a huge difference, but still a difference, because you might have the case that you might remove or nullify whatever descriptive data. Well, that's a concern of the status satellite. It will keep track of all the changes, but if the business key is getting deleted, and with that, typically the whole row from the source, that's where the status tracking satellite jumps in and keeps track of those deletions of those incoming source rows, essentially. So that's the first thing. So we got 4 satellites, 2 data satellites, 2 status tracking satellites from 2 different systems, essentially, a PRT that involves all these satellites, and that's important. All right, and then we have a view here, and besides, let me just move some stuff here. So more or less the standard view for dimension. So we see here that this dimension view for the concept selects from the PIT table. That's the first part. So it's type 2 dimension, I believe, that essentially just gets the granularity from the PIT and then joins all the satellites. It joins both the data satellites with the descriptive data from source 1 and source 2 down here, but also joins, just like a standard satellite, it joins the effectivity satellites. Down here from satellite for source system 1, that's the status tracking satellite or effectivity satellite, status tracking satellite for source 1 and status tracking satellite for source 2. And we see that the join condition is just like a standard satellite. So we join by the hash key from the PRT index here, this hash key here, the PRT index for the satellite. We join based on the hash key from the satellite, and the data vault load date for this particular source joins again satellite for the source. And the same is done for the status tracking satellite. Let's just double check this. So we got another hash key here from the index, right? This joins against the index, against the satellite's hash key. And then we have another load date for this particular satellite, for the status tracking satellite, and that joins against the load date in satellite. So it's all good for both cases. And that's how we work with this. So the person here asking the question want to validate if this approach is correct and send me 2 or 3 different options. This one is the option we're using. We just treat the status tracking satellite, but also effective satellites just as ordinary satellites. And any deletion timeline, maybe a deleted date, I believe it's done. Here we have an active flag, which is fine. Active flags coming from the source or any deletion timeline that you might calculate by yourself based on the existence or non-existence of the row in the delivery in the source system. We just treat those flags as descriptive fields, just like any business timelines coming from the source, date, from ready-to date, and so on. It's just descriptive data. We don't care that this is like business times we want to use downstream or what else. So, and if it's just a start satellite, we just add them to the PRT table for information delivery, just like you did here. That's perfect. And then you can implement some more or less complex business logic to indicate if a customer or product is still active or not. Could be this business logic where you combine this some way or the other. I leave that out. I've seen all kinds of different business logics. When do you consider a customer still being active? Just remember, there's a couple of comments on this one. So one thing is, I've seen all kinds of stuff, right? So you could have a business logic that says, okay, if the customer is deleted in the leading system, whatever that is, we consider the business key as being deleted. So you have a leading satellite or leading status tracking satellite that gives you this information, and you would essentially use it for the deletion flag in a dimension, essentially. Or you could also have cases where they said, well, if the customer has been removed or deleted from all the source systems, then we consider the customers being deleted. I've never seen this happen, well, by the way, but that's the other business rule. So the business rule depends. What you have to do is you have to know for each particular source system, is this customer still there or not? And that's what you're doing here. You have one status tracking satellite with the deletion flag for every source system, because your users are deleting those customers or concepts or products, whatever, per source system independently from each other. And that's how we evaluate this. Just add them to the PIT table, and then you can use the data from the satellites to make a decision if this customer is still active or not. You just calculate this based on in your case, is active flags. Now, one final comment for the dimension. Do we add or do we remove those deleted customers from the dimension, or do we just flag them? Well, I know there's a good number of users who would like to remove those customer records from the dimensions. I'm not a big fan of this, but it's a business decision, right? I'm not a big fan because you still have the facts, revenues that are related to your customers, to your deleted customers, to your deleted products, and so on in the past. The fact is still there. Even though you deleted product, doesn't mean the fact is gone. The revenue is still there. So the question is, what do you do with those facts, those revenues, if the product or the customer is removed from the dimension entry, right? There's no dimension record anymore, dimension member for your product anymore, and that's an issue. So yeah, we can deal with this, like replacing the product by the unknown product, that kind of stuff, right? So it's actually fairly easy, but I still have more information. I still know this revenue in the past has been related to a product which has been deleted in the meantime. Fine. So I'm a fan of adding I like the requirement, let's say that, of flagging the product, the dimension member for a product, as inactive or deleted inside the dimension, but it still exists. I get that for GDPR reasons, you might have to do something more to delete a consumer record, for example. I get that, but then I still would like to anonymize the dimension member and distinguish those different consumers, which I still know that there have been consumers behind this record. I just don't know who that is anymore. So we can all get this done. So I'm not a big fan of removing dimension members just because they have been deleted in the source. I'm flagging them because I still have facts referring to them. That's the issue. All right. And I might have still more data about even a deleted something, product or whatever. I still have historical data, right? So I can still know what product was that, what we sold here. All right. So, but that's the approach. So, and that's what you're doing here as well, I believe. That's the idea. So it's exactly this approach. You just treat these satellites as standard satellites, join them based on the PIT table, which also means you include them in the PIT table. And then you can calculate whatever the business wants. And there could be complicated or easy, what else, right? So here you do some other calculations, getting data from the leading system, if it's still active or not. I'm not sure because, but it could be a business rule, right? So I'm not arguing with your business views here. But the question is, even if the product or customer has been removed from the leading system, you still, in your data warehouse, you still have the latest version of this customer inside your system. So you could argue, if it's a leading system, I could still use that over the second data from the secondary system. But it's all business rule, right? So I'm not arguing here. I'm just saying, well, think about this, but I don't really care. It's a business rule. If they wanted that, we would advise them, but that's it, right? So it's their decision, essentially. All right, cool. Good question. It's one of the few times where I'm actually adding code to the slide. The code sample must fit on the slide, right? So if that's, and it must be still readable, which is the case here. If that's the case, we can go for it. Let me just double check. There's something on the chat here. Okay, so let me just go for a question here from Eric. Hi, Michael. Different subject, but can you please remind me where in the ZDDP 2.0 material we can find the business key lookup pre-join in case a particular staging delivery contains only technical identifier surrogates within the same source system on behalf of populating a raw data vault hub. Okay, so here's the thing. In the training material, in the online material, we discuss essentially the individual layers of the data vault architecture, like the staging area, the raw data vault, the business vault, and so on. In the live training, we only discuss the architecture on a one slider, essentially discussing the layers, showing the layers, but the definition of the layers is done in the online material. So there is a video where Dan essentially discusses the staging area, and the requirements for the staging area, or the definition says that you can normalize and denormalize data if it makes it easier for you to process the data downstream. Well, I'm not a big fan of denormalizing data or normalizing data. I'm a big fan of absorbing the data as it is being delivered and then breaking it apart into the raw data, essentially. But I see the point. So if it makes it easier, I wouldn't argue against it because it's all good. We can do it. So we can normalize and denormalize. That's number one. That's the definition. And in the end, it's still a hard rule because we don't change the content. We just modify the structure of your incoming data. We essentially break it apart into business keys, relationships, descriptive data, right? That's what we capture in the raw data vault. So it's all structural changes. And yeah, if it makes it easier for you to normalize or denormalize somewhere in between the staging area or the incoming data, let's say, the incoming data and the raw data vault, it's fine. We just modify structure. So that's the argumentation, essentially. With that in mind, and with the fact that you want to take control of which business key you want to go for in your hubs, right? You don't want to be, just because the source system is using technical IDs, you don't want to use technical IDs in your hub, right? That means that you are depending on the incoming source data set, how you model it in the raw data vault. That can be true. So we want to use the business keys the business is using, which means that we go for typically at least, we try to go for the natural keys for the customer numbers and so on in the hubs model, essentially. So we decide for the hubs what business keys we want to use under some requirements, let's say. Now, to achieve that, because in your source you have technical IDs, in your primary primary keys and foreign keys, everything's based on primary keys. If you want to load a link, you're looking at technical IDs all the time, right? So, but we want to use the business keys that we went up for or decided for in the hubs. And to achieve that, we just denormalize. So what we're doing is, when we get a source table with technical IDs, we have technical ID for a product and for the customer, let's say, in a transaction table. Well, we can denormalize. We just established. So we just denormalize the business key you decided for from the reference tables, customer and product, based on the technical ID and the foreign key. We just denormalize the business key. Nobody says we have to denormalize everything. We just denormalize one particular row, essentially, and we can automate this to the point that, for example, in FlowBI, the Gen AI approach for Data Vault, we do this fully automatically, right? So based on structured information, what we do is we denormalize the business key FlowBI decided to use. We denormalize that one into the loading procedures of the model, essentially, of the raw data vault. So we can automate this at 100% essentially. Yeah, and it's all based on denormalization, which is okay from that perspective. Okay, cool. I know there's some misunderstanding or whatever going on in comments and so on, but if it's just a denormalization, that's what it is. Cool. Yeah, thanks for the live question here. And yeah, if you have a question like this and can hold it just a little bit more for use this form here, sfr.e/db Friday, that's where you can essentially submit your question. Thanks for your live question. I like live questions actually. You can also submit a question for next week's or one of the following weeks Data Fridays on this form here. And then you can also join our other webinars on we have a monthly webinar on Warescape and DBT, where not I'm doing it, but essentially it's performed by our Warescape and DBT experts. And they discuss questions in a very similar format to here. Check out scalefree.to/webinars. If you can't wait until next Friday for a question, or if I don't pick it up for whatever reason, then check out the Data Innovators Exchange. That's essentially a forum-style community where you can sign up for and ask questions in the forum, and then people from Scalefree and Ignition Data in Australia will jump on your question as quick as possible. There's always a competition going on. A longer story, but they have a reason to really answer them quickly, essentially. So that's the other option. Go for the Data Innovators Exchange to ask a question and get answers. All right. So yeah, thanks for joining today. And I hope you have a nice weekend and see you hopefully next Friday. Thank you guys.